The rain poured down on the streets of New York City, washing away the dirt and grime, but also driving most people indoors. Marcus Chen stood under the awning of Carnegie Hall, shaking the water from his expensive coat. He had just finished a sold-out concert, his fingers still tingling from the final notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. The applause still echoed in his mind. Thousands of people rising to their feet, their admiration filling the grand hall. Marcus was at the peak of his career. At 35 years old, he had performed in every major concert hall across the world. His albums topped classical music charts, and critics called him the greatest pianist of his generation. Yet tonight, as he stood in the rain, he felt an emptiness he couldn't explain. The performance had been technically perfect, every note precise, every emotion calculated, but something was missing, something he couldn't name. His driver pulled up to the curb, but Marcus waved him away. He needed to walk, to clear his head, even in the rain. He pulled up his collar and started down the street, his polished shoes splashing through puddles. The city at night was a different world from the one he usually inhabited. No fancy restaurants, no exclusive parties, just the raw reality of urban life. As he walked past a subway entrance, he heard something that made him stop. Music, piano music, but it wasn't coming from any recording or speaker. Someone was playing, and they were playing beautifully. Marcus followed the sound, descending the stairs into the subway station. The smell of damp concrete and old coffee filled his nostrils, a stark contrast to the perfumed air of Carnegie Hall. At the bottom of the stairs, in a corner near the turnstiles, sat a man at an old upright piano. The instrument had seen better days. Several keys were chipped, the wood was scratched and faded, and Marcus could tell from where he stood that it was terribly out of tune. But the man playing it seemed oblivious to these flaws. His fingers moved across the keys with a grace that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. The homeless man looked to be in his 60s, though it was hard to tell. His face was weathered and lined, his beard long and unkempt. He wore layers of tattered clothing, and a worn blanket was draped across his shoulders. An old coffee can sat on top of the piano with a few coins and crumpled dollar bills inside. But when Marcus looked at the man's hands, he saw something remarkable. Despite the dirt under his fingernails and the rough calloused skin, those hands moved with the precision and delicacy of a trained musician. The man was playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of the most beautiful and technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. But he wasn't just playing the notes, he was telling a story, pouring emotion into every phrase, making the broken piano sing in ways Marcus had never heard before. The music spoke of loss and longing, of memories cherished and dreams abandoned. It was raw and honest in a way that made Marcus's perfect performance earlier that evening seem hollow by comparison. A few commuters rushed past, barely noticing the music. One person tossed a quarter into the can without breaking stride. Marcus stood frozen, unable to move, barely able to breathe. He had studied Chopin his entire life, had played this very nocturne in concert halls across Europe, but he had never heard it played like this. This homeless man, sitting at a broken piano in a subway station, was playing with a depth of feeling that Marcus had spent his whole career trying to achieve. When the piece ended, the man sat quietly for a moment, his hands resting on the keys. Then he began another piece, this time Debussy's Clair de Lune. Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes. He didn't understand what was happening to him. He had heard the greatest pianists in the world, had studied with masters, had dedicated his life to music. Yet here, in this unlikely place, he was experiencing something profound. Something that touched a part of his soul he had forgotten existed. Marcus moved closer, careful not to disturb the man's playing. He studied the homeless musician's face and saw it was transformed. The weariness and hardship seemed to melt away, replaced by an expression of pure joy and peace. Whatever burdens this man carried in his daily life, in this moment, he was free. The music had lifted him to another place, and he was taking Marcus with him. When the Debussy ended, Marcus found himself applauding, his hands coming together instinctively. The sound echoed through the subway station, louder than it should have been in that concrete space. The homeless man looked up, startled, as if suddenly remembering where he was. His eyes met Marcus's, and for a moment, neither man spoke. Marcus saw something flicker in those eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or maybe just wariness. The homeless man had probably dealt with plenty of curious onlookers, people who stopped for a moment to listen before moving on with their lives. Their brief encounter with beauty quickly forgotten. But Marcus couldn't move on. He stepped forward, pulling out his wallet. He took out several bills and placed them carefully in the coffee can, but he knew that wasn't enough. Money wasn't what this moment called for. He needed to say something. To acknowledge what he had just witnessed, but the words wouldn't come. The homeless man watched him carefully, his hands now still on the keys. There was dignity in his posture, despite his circumstances. A quiet pride that Marcus recognized and respected. This was not a man who wanted pity. This was a musician, perhaps even a great one, and musicians spoke through their art, not through words. Marcus cleared his throat and finally found his voice. It came out softer than he intended, humbled by what he had just heard. Marcus took a deep breath and spoke. That was extraordinary. Where did you learn to play like that? His voice was gentle, genuinely curious rather than condescending. The homeless man studied him for a long moment before answering. A lifetime ago, the man said quietly. His voice was rough from years of life on the streets, but there was an educated quality to it that surprised Marcus. I studied at Juilliard, back when I was young and full of dreams. Seems like another life now. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. Juilliard was one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. He himself had studied there, though clearly at a different time than this man. What happened? Marcus asked, then immediately regretted the question. It was too personal, too intrusive. The homeless man looked down at his hands on the piano keys. Life happened. Bad choices, worse luck. Lost my family, lost my career, lost myself for a while. But I never lost the music. That stayed with me through everything. He played a few soft notes, a fragment of melody that hung in the air between them. The music is the only thing that keeps me sane out here. When I play, I'm not homeless. I'm not hungry or cold. I'm just a musician doing what I was born to do. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding more than the man realized. He had spent years perfecting his technique, building his career, collecting awards and accolades. But somewhere along the way, he had lost touch with the pure love of music that had drawn him to the piano in the first place. His performances had become about precision and perfection, about maintaining his reputation and satisfying critics. He had forgotten what it felt like to play simply because the music demanded to be played. "My name is Marcus," he said, extending his hand. "Marcus Chen." The homeless man's eyes widened slightly. Even living on the streets, he clearly recognized the name. Everyone in the classical music world knew Marcus Chen. "I know who you are," the man said, shaking Marcus's hand. His grip was surprisingly strong. "I've heard your recordings. You're brilliant. Technically perfect." He paused, and Marcus detected something in his tone. Not quite criticism, but perhaps observation. "I heard you played Carnegie Hall tonight." "I did," Marcus admitted, "but what I just heard you play, on this broken piano, in a subway station, moved me more than anything I played on that stage tonight." The words came out before he could stop them, honest and raw. The homeless man smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "That's because you're playing for them," he said, gesturing vaguely upward, toward the concert halls and the world Marcus inhabited. "I play for myself, and for the music. There's a freedom in having nothing left to lose. I don't have to worry about what critics think, or whether I'll get booked for the next concert. I just play what I feel." Marcus felt something shift inside him. This man, who had lost everything, had somehow held on to something Marcus had been searching for. "What's your name?" Marcus asked. "Thomas," the man replied. "Thomas Sullivan. Though these days, most people just call me Tom if they call me anything at all." "Thomas," Marcus repeated. "Would you play something else for me? Anything you want." Thomas looked at him carefully. as if trying to determine whether this was genuine interest or just another curious passerby who would soon move on. But something in Marcus's face must have convinced him, because he nodded and turned back to the piano. His hands found the keys again, and he began to play. This time, it wasn't a classical piece. It was something Thomas had composed himself, Marcus realized, an improvisation that flowed from his fingers like water. The melody was haunting and beautiful, speaking of loneliness and hope, of memories and dreams. It spoke of cold nights and empty stomachs, but also of sunrise and the first warm day of spring. It was the story of Thomas's life told through music, and it was more powerful than anything Marcus had heard in years. As Thomas played, more people began to gather. The subway station was busy at this hour, and several commuters stopped to listen. Unlike the earlier passers-by, who had rushed past without noticing, these people were drawn by something in the music they couldn't ignore. A young woman in a business suit stopped, her phone forgotten in her hand. An elderly couple held hands and listened with tears in their eyes. A teenage boy with headphones around his neck stood transfixed, his usual music forgotten. Marcus watched the small crowd grow, saw the expressions on their faces change as Thomas's music reached them. This was what music was supposed to do, he realized. It wasn't about technical perfection or flawless execution. It was about connection, about touching something deep in the human soul that words could never reach. When Thomas finished, there was a moment of profound silence. Then someone began to clap, and others joined in. The applause echoed through the subway station, and people began dropping money into the coffee can. But more than that, they lingered, hoping for another piece, another moment of beauty in their ordinary day. Thomas looked overwhelmed by the response. His eyes glistened with moisture, and Marcus understood that it had been a long time since this man had played for an appreciative audience. The validation, the recognition of his gift, meant more than any amount of money they could give him. Marcus made a decision in that moment, one that would change both their lives. He waited until the small crowd dispersed, until it was just the two of them again in that corner of the subway station. The distant rumble of trains and the echo of footsteps provided a constant background rhythm to their conversation. "Thomas," Marcus said carefully, "I have a concert tomorrow night at Lincoln Center. It's an intimate venue, only 200 seats, very exclusive. I want you to play." Thomas stared at him, as if he had spoken in a foreign language. "What? That's impossible. Look at me. I can't." "You can," Marcus insisted. "I'll arrange everything. I have connections, resources. We'll get you cleaned up, get you proper clothes. But more importantly, I want people to hear what I heard tonight. The world needs to hear you play." Thomas shook his head, fear and disbelief warring on his weathered face. "You don't understand. I haven't played on a real piano in years. This old thing," he patted the battered upright affectionately, "doesn't count. And I have nothing. No home to get ready in. No decent clothes. No, I told you, I'll handle everything," Marcus interrupted gently. "I have a hotel suite. You can stay there tonight, get cleaned up, rest. Tomorrow, we'll get you whatever you need. I have a tuxedo you can borrow. We're about the same size." He paused, seeing the resistance in Thomas's eyes. "Please, this isn't charity. This is one musician recognizing another. You have a gift, Thomas, and it deserves to be shared." Thomas was silent for a long moment, his fingers absently playing a few notes on the piano. Finally, he looked up at Marcus with an expression of such raw vulnerability that Marcus had to look away. "Why are you doing this?" Thomas asked. "You don't know me. I could be dangerous. I could be crazy. Why would you risk your reputation on a homeless man you just met?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Because tonight, you reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. Because your playing touched something in me that's been dead for years. Because I think fate brought me down into this subway station for a reason." He met Thomas's eyes steadily. "And because I believe that talent like yours shouldn't be wasted, no matter what circumstances brought you here." Thomas's hands trembled slightly as they rested on the keys. "I'm scared," he admitted quietly. "It's been so long. What if I freeze up there? What if I can't do it?" Then we'll face that together, Marcus said. But I don't think you'll freeze. I think you'll be magnificent. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to his assistant, then turned back to Thomas. My car is waiting outside. Come with me. No strings attached. If you change your mind tomorrow, you can walk away. But give yourself this chance. Give the world this chance to hear what you can do. Thomas looked around at the subway station, at the broken piano that had been his refuge and his solace for so many years. He looked at the coffee can with its meager collection of coins and bills. Then he looked at Marcus, at this famous pianist who had appeared out of nowhere offering an impossible opportunity. Slowly, carefully, Thomas stood up. His legs were stiff from sitting, and he swayed slightly. Marcus reached out to steady him. Okay, Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. Okay, I'll try. The ride to Marcus's hotel was surreal for Thomas. He sat in the back of the luxury car, trying not to touch anything with his dirty clothes. Marcus sat beside him, scrolling through his phone, making arrangements. Thomas watched the city pass by through the tinted windows, seeing it from a perspective he hadn't experienced in years. He was used to viewing the world from ground level, from doorways and street corners. From inside this car, with its leather seats and climate control, the city looked different, cleaner, more distant. They pulled up to the entrance of the Waldorf Astoria, and Thomas's anxiety spiked. I can't go in there looking like this, he said, panicking. They'll throw me out. They won't, Marcus assured him. Trust me. He stepped out of the car and came around to Thomas's door, opening it himself. The doorman's eyes widened when he saw Thomas, but one look from Marcus silenced any objection. They walked through the opulent lobby, and Thomas tried to make himself small, aware of every head turning to stare at him. In the elevator, Thomas caught sight of himself in the mirrored walls and barely recognized his own reflection. He looked old, worn, defeated. How could Marcus think he could perform in front of an audience looking like this? But Marcus seemed unfazed, chatting casually about the hotel's history, as if there was nothing unusual about bringing a homeless man to his suite. The suite was larger than any apartment Thomas had ever lived in, even in his former life. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, now dark and dotted with lights. Elegant furniture filled the space, and fresh flowers sat in crystal vases. It felt like stepping into another world, one Thomas had left behind so long ago he'd almost forgotten it existed. The bathroom is through there, Marcus said, pointing. Take as long as you need. There are clean towels, soap, everything you might want. I've asked the hotel to send up some clothes for tonight, just comfortable things. Tomorrow, we'll get you properly fitted for the concert. He paused, seeing the overwhelmed expression on Thomas's face. It's okay to feel out of place. Just take it one step at a time. Thomas nodded and made his way to the bathroom. When he closed the door behind him and saw himself in the full-length mirror, he almost broke down. His beard was tangled and grey, his skin was weathered and dirty, his clothes were barely holding together. But his hands, when he held them up, were still the hands of a pianist. Scarred and calloused, yes, but capable of creating beauty. He turned on the shower, and when the hot water hit his skin, he did cry. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had a hot shower. He stood under the spray for a long time, watching years of street life wash away down the drain. He used the expensive soap and shampoo, scrubbed his skin until it was raw and clean. He carefully washed his beard, considering shaving it off, but deciding that could wait for tomorrow. When he finally emerged, wrapped in the hotel's plush robe, he found clothes laid out on the bed, soft sweatpants, a comfortable t-shirt, thick socks. Simple things, but to Thomas they felt like luxuries. There was also a tray of food, sandwiches and fruit and coffee, and Thomas realized he was starving. He ate slowly, savoring every bite, barely believing this was real. Marcus knocked on the bedroom door. Okay, in there? Yes, Thomas called back. Thank you for all of this. Get some rest, Marcus said. Tomorrow is going to be a big day. Thomas lay down on the bed, sinking into the soft mattress and clean sheets. He stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. What had he agreed to? Could he really do this? The fear was overwhelming, but underneath it was something else. Excitement, hope, possibility. For the first time in years, Thomas allowed himself to imagine a future beyond surviving one more day on the streets. Morning came too quickly for Thomas. He woke, disoriented, forgetting for a moment where he was. The soft bed, the quiet room, the absence of street noise, all felt alien to him. Then memory flooded back, and with it, a fresh wave of anxiety. Today was the day. Today, he would either redeem himself or fail spectacularly in front of an audience who expected perfection. Marcus knocked on his door with breakfast. "How did you sleep?" he asked, setting down a tray with coffee, eggs, toast, and fresh fruit. "Better than I have in years," Thomas admitted. "But I'm terrified," good Marcus said, surprising him. "Fear means you care. It means this matters to you. The day you stop being nervous before a performance is the day you should quit." He poured coffee for both of them. "I spoke to my publicist this morning. She wasn't happy about the last-minute change to the program, but she's intrigued. The press is going to be there." Thomas's hand shook as he reached for his coffee cup. "The press? Marcus, I don't know if I can handle that kind of attention." "You won't be alone," Marcus assured him. "I'll be right there with you. We're in this together." He pulled out his phone and showed Thomas the revised program. "I'll open with Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Then you'll play whatever you want, whatever speaks to you. And then, if you're willing, I thought we could close with a duet. 4 hands, 1 piano, something spontaneous and beautiful." The idea both thrilled and terrified Thomas. He hadn't played with another pianist since his Juilliard days. What if I mess up? What if my hands shake or I forget the music? "Then you'll be human," Marcus said simply. "Thomas, these people coming tonight, they've heard perfect performances 1,000 times. They can buy recordings where every note is flawless. What they can't buy is authenticity, genuine emotion, the kind of raw honesty I heard in that subway station. That's what you're going to give them." After breakfast, a stylist arrived at the suite. She was a woman in her 50s named Rosa, who had worked with Marcus for years. If she was surprised by Thomas's situation, she didn't show it. She studied him with a professional eye, then got to work. First came the haircut, trimming his long grey hair into something more manageable. Then the beard, which she shaped and styled rather than removing completely, saying it gave him character. Next came clothes. Marcus's tailor arrived with several tuxedos to try. Thomas stood in front of the mirror as the tailor measured and pinned, and he barely recognized the man staring back at him. Clean, well-groomed, dressed in expensive clothes, he looked almost respectable. But it was his eyes that had changed the most. There was a light in them that hadn't been there in years. "You look like yourself again," Marcus observed. And Thomas realized it was true. This was who he had been, who he was supposed to be, before life had knocked him down. The afternoon passed in a blur of preparation. They went to Lincoln Center early so Thomas could familiarize himself with the piano. The moment he sat down at the Steinway Grand and placed his fingers on the keys, something clicked into place. This instrument was perfectly tuned, perfectly maintained, responsive to his slightest touch. It was like being reunited with an old friend. He played a few scales, then launched into a Chopin etude, his fingers finding their way across the keys as if no time had passed at all. Marcus sat in the front row, listening, and when Thomas finished, there were tears on his face. "You're ready," Marcus said. "More than ready." But as the hours ticked down to the performance and the audience began to arrive, Thomas's anxiety returned in full force. He stood backstage, peeking through the curtain at the elegantly dressed people taking their seats. These were New York's cultural elite, people who attended the opera and the symphony, people who knew music and would recognize any mistake he made. "I can't do this," he whispered to Marcus. "Look at them. They're expecting you, not some homeless man pretending to be something he's not." Marcus grabbed him by the shoulders and turned him around. "Thomas, listen to me. You are not pretending. You are a musician. That never changed, no matter where you slept or what you wore. Your talent is real. Your gift is real. And those people out there are about to experience something extraordinary." The stage manager gave them a 5-minute warning. Marcus straightened his bow tie and took a deep breath. "Remember why you play," he said to Thomas. "Not for them, not for the critics, not even for me. Play for the music. Play because you were born to do this." The lights dimmed in the concert hall, and Marcus walked onto the stage. The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. He took his seat at the piano and began Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. His playing was technically flawless, as always, but there was something different tonight. Perhaps Thomas's raw emotion had influenced him, because Marcus played with a depth of feeling he hadn't accessed in years. The audience was mesmerized. When the piece ended and the applause died down, Marcus stood and approached the microphone. "Thank you," he said. "Tonight, I want to share something special with you. Yesterday, I encountered a musician who reminded me of something I had forgotten. He reminded me that music isn't about perfection, it's about truth, about emotion, about touching the human soul." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I've invited this musician to perform for you tonight, and I promise you've never heard anything quite like this." He gestured to the wings, and Thomas took a deep breath. This was it. The moment that would either redeem him or destroy him. He thought about the years on the street, the cold nights and hungry days, the broken piano in the subway station that had been his only comfort. He thought about the music that had sustained him through everything, the notes that had kept him alive when he wanted to give up. He walked onto the stage, and the room fell silent. Thomas could feel every eye on him, could sense their confusion and curiosity. Who was this man? Why was Marcus Chen giving up his spotlight to an unknown performer? He sat at the piano, his hands hovering over the keys. For a terrifying moment, his mind went blank. Then he closed his eyes, took a breath, and let the music come. The first notes floated through the concert hall, soft and tentative, like a bird testing its wings after a long winter. Thomas had chosen Debussy's Clair de Lune, the same piece he had played in the subway station. But on this magnificent Steinway, with perfect acoustics surrounding him, the music transformed into something transcendent. As he played, Thomas forgot about the audience. He forgot about his fears and doubts. He forgot about the years of hardship and loss. There was only the music, flowing through him like water, like light, like something beyond words. His hands moved across the keys with a grace that came from decades of practice and a lifetime of feeling. Each note carried the weight of his experiences, the pain and the joy, the despair and the hope. In the audience, people began to react in ways they never had before. A woman in the third row found tears streaming down her face, though she couldn't say why. A renowned music critic, who had attended thousands of performances with professional detachment, felt his throat tighten with emotion. A young pianist who had come to study Marcus Chen's technique forgot to take notes. Completely absorbed in what she was hearing, the music spoke to something deep within each listener, touching places they had forgotten existed. It wasn't just the technical skill, though that was evident. It was the absolute authenticity of it, the raw emotion that couldn't be faked or manufactured. Thomas was playing his life story, every note a chapter, every phrase a memory. The music spoke of a young man's dreams at Juilliard, of love found and lost, of success that slipped through his fingers like water. It spoke of the long fall from grace, the cold reality of life on the streets, and the small moments of beauty that kept him alive. When the piece reached its climactic moment, the most beautiful and technically demanding section, Thomas's hands seemed to move of their own accord. Years of muscle memory combined with fresh inspiration created something magical. The notes cascaded through the hall like moonlight itself, silvery and ethereal, touching everything and everyone. As the final notes faded away, there was a moment of absolute silence. The kind of silence that comes when something profound has just occurred. When words would be an insult to what has been experienced, Thomas lifted his hands from the keys and sat perfectly still, almost afraid to break the spell. Then the applause began. It started with one person, then two. Then the entire audience rose to their feet. The sound was deafening, waves of appreciation and recognition washing over Thomas like a physical force. People were crying openly now, not trying to hide their emotions. The applause went on, building rather than diminishing. Thomas stood slowly, almost stumbling. Marcus was there immediately, steadying him, guiding him to take a bow. The ovation continued, and Thomas saw faces in the crowd, really saw them. These wealthy, sophisticated people were looking at him not with pity or curiosity, but with genuine admiration and gratitude. He had given them something precious, something money couldn't buy. Marcus took his hand and led him back to the piano. "Are you ready for the duet?" he whispered. Thomas nodded, not trusting his voice. They sat together on the bench, two pianists from vastly different circumstances, united by their love of music. What happened next would be talked about for years. Marcus began an improvisation, a simple melody in the upper register. Thomas listened for a moment, then joined in with a complementary harmony in the lower keys. They had never practiced this, never planned it, but their playing synchronized perfectly. It was a conversation in music, question and answer, statement and response. Two souls communicating in the only language that mattered. The improvisation evolved and grew, becoming more complex, more daring. Sometimes Marcus would lead, sometimes Thomas, but mostly they moved together, as if guided by the same invisible hand. They played jazz riffs and classical themes, modern harmonies and ancient melodies. They played sadness and joy, loneliness and companionship, despair and hope. They played the story of their unlikely meeting, the bridge between two worlds. The power of music to transcend all boundaries. The audience watched in stunned silence, witnessing something they knew was unique and unrepeatable. This wasn't a rehearsed performance, but a genuine moment of creation, raw and honest, and absolutely real. Several people pulled out their phones, trying to record it. Knowing that words would never adequately describe what they were experiencing, when the improvisation finally came to its natural conclusion, both pianists lifting their hands from the keys at exactly the same moment, the silence lasted even longer than before. Then the applause exploded with even greater intensity. People were shouting, "Bravo!" and whistling. The standing ovation went on for 10 minutes, then 15. Marcus and Thomas bowed again and again, but the applause didn't stop. Finally, Marcus approached the microphone once more. The audience gradually quieted, eager to hear what he would say. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "What you just witnessed is the purest form of music I have ever had the privilege to be part of. The man beside me is Thomas Sullivan. Until yesterday, he was playing on a broken piano in a subway station, but he has always been, and will always be, a true artist." He turned to Thomas. "Thank you for reminding me why I became a pianist. Thank you for showing me that technical perfection means nothing without heart, without soul, without truth." He looked back at the audience. Thomas's story is one of talent lost and found again. It's a reminder that genius can exist anywhere, even in places we would never think to look. It's a reminder that we should never judge anyone by their circumstances, because we never know what gifts they might possess. The audience erupted in applause again. Marcus continued, "I've arranged for several recordings of tonight's performance to be made available. All proceeds will go toward establishing a fund to provide instruments and music education to homeless individuals. Because if there's one Thomas Sullivan out there, there are probably others, and their voices deserve to be heard." More applause, more tears. Thomas stood beside Marcus, overwhelmed by it all. He had woken up yesterday morning in a doorway, hungry and cold, wondering if he would survive another winter on the streets. Now, he was standing on one of the world's most prestigious stages, having just received a standing ovation from some of the most knowledgeable music lovers in the world. It felt like a dream, like something that couldn't possibly be real. Backstage after the performance, Thomas was surrounded by people. Reporters wanted interviews, music critics wanted to shake his hand, and several concert promoters were already trying to book him for future performances. It was overwhelming and surreal. Marcus stayed close, helping Thomas navigate the attention, deflecting the more aggressive inquiries. A woman in her 70s pushed through the crowd. She had tears on her face and trembling hands. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice shaking, "I don't know if you remember me. I'm Margaret Feldman. I was your teacher at Juilliard, almost 40 years ago. Thomas stared at her, memories flooding back. Professor Feldman had been one of his favorites, a demanding but caring instructor who had believed in his potential. Professor Feldman, he whispered. I never thought I'd see you again. I'm so sorry for how things turned out. I disappointed you. I disappointed everyone. She grabbed his hands, holding them tightly. You disappointed no one, she said firmly. Life knocked you down, but you never stopped being the musician I knew you could be. What you played tonight, that was the Thomas Sullivan I always believed in. That was the artist I knew was inside you. She wiped her eyes. I've taught hundreds of students over the years, but you were always one of the most talented. I grieved when you disappeared. I searched for you. I never stopped wondering what happened to that brilliant young man. Thomas couldn't hold back his tears any longer. He embraced his old teacher, and they stood there crying together while camera flashes went off around them. It was a moment of healing, of closure, of recognition that transcended words. More people from Thomas's past emerged. A fellow student from Juilliard who had gone on to play with the New York Philharmonic. A music journalist who had written a glowing review of Thomas's senior recital decades ago. Each one had a memory to share, a piece of Thomas's history that he had thought was lost forever. They reminded him that before the fall, before the years of homelessness, he had been someone, had mattered to people, had made an impact with his music. But not everyone was supportive. One critic, a sour-faced man named Edmund Price, who was known for his harsh reviews, cornered Marcus with a sneer. Really, Chen? This is just a publicity stunt, isn't it? A feel-good story for the press. You'll get your headlines, and this homeless man will be back on the streets in a week when the novelty wears off. Marcus's eyes flashed with anger. But before he could respond, Thomas spoke up. Maybe you're right, he said calmly. Maybe this is just one night, one moment in time, but that doesn't make it any less real. For one night, I got to be a pianist again. I got to share my music with people who appreciated it. Even if I'm back in that subway station tomorrow, I'll have tonight to remember. That's more than I had yesterday. Price looked taken aback by Thomas's quiet dignity. Other people nearby nodded in approval, and the critic slunk away without another word. Marcus put his hand on Thomas's shoulder, proud of how he had handled the confrontation. Later, in a quiet corner, away from the crowd, Marcus and Thomas sat together with cups of coffee. The adrenaline was wearing off, and exhaustion was setting in. What happens now? Thomas asked. I can't go back to the streets after this, but I can't impose on your hospitality forever either. You're not imposing, Marcus said. And I've been thinking about this. I have a proposal for you. He pulled out a folder with some papers inside. I own a small music school in Brooklyn. It's been run by a manager for years, but I've always wanted to do more with it. I want you to teach there. Not just classical piano, but music theory, composition, whatever you're passionate about. I'll provide you with an apartment nearby, a decent salary, and all the support you need to get back on your feet. Thomas stared at the papers, hardly believing what he was hearing. But why? You barely know me. What if I fail? What if I fall back into old patterns? Then we'll deal with it together, Marcus said. Thomas, I'm not doing this because I feel sorry for you. I'm doing this because you're a gifted musician and teacher, and those gifts shouldn't be wasted. Plus, I'm selfish. Working with you, learning from you, that's going to make me a better musician too. You reminded me of something I'd lost, and I need to keep that alive. Thomas looked at the contract, tears blurring his vision. It was a lifeline, an opportunity he never thought he'd have again. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Marcus replied simply. Say you'll take this chance and see where it leads. Yes, Thomas whispered. Yes, I'll do it. Over the next few days, the story of Thomas Sullivan and his remarkable performance spread far beyond New York. Videos of the concert went viral online. News outlets picked up the story, running features about the homeless pianist who brought a concert hall to tears. Some people were inspired by the tale of redemption, while others criticized Marcus for exploitation or questioned whether Thomas's talent was being exaggerated. But Thomas barely paid attention to the media frenzy. He was too busy settling into his new apartment. A modest but comfortable place, with big windows and enough space for an upright piano that Marcus had delivered. He spent hours at that piano, relearning pieces he had forgotten, composing new music. Preparing for his first day of teaching. The music school was a converted warehouse with high ceilings and excellent acoustics. It served students from the local community, many of them from low-income families who couldn't afford expensive private lessons. When Thomas walked in for the first time, he was nervous. What if the students didn't respect him? What if he had forgotten how to teach? But those fears melted away when he met his first class. A dozen children ranging from 8 to 15 years old, all eager to learn, all looking at him with hopeful eyes. He saw himself in them, saw the same hunger for music that had driven him at that age. He knew he could help them, could pass on what he had learned through both success and failure. His teaching style was unlike anything the students had experienced before. He didn't just teach technique and theory. He taught them to feel the music, to understand that every piece told a story. That their job as musicians was to connect with that story and share it with others. He taught them that mistakes were part of the learning process, that perfection was less important than authenticity. 6 months passed, and Thomas's life transformed in ways he never imagined possible. His students at the music school flourished under his guidance. Word spread about the remarkable teacher who had once been homeless, and enrollment doubled. Parents reported that their children practiced more, understood music more deeply, and most importantly, loved playing in a way they never had before. Thomas's story inspired others to. Other homeless individuals with hidden talents began to come forward, encouraged by his example. The fund Marcus had established grew beyond expectations, helping dozens of people get instruments, lessons, and a second chance at their passions. A documentary filmmaker reached out, wanting to tell Thomas's story in depth. Thomas was hesitant at first, but agreed when he realized it might help others in similar situations. Marcus and Thomas developed a deep friendship built on mutual respect and shared love of music. They met regularly to play together, sometimes in formal settings, but often just in Thomas's apartment, playing for the joy of it. Their duets became legendary in classical music circles, and they were invited to perform together at venues around the world. One evening, they sat in Thomas's apartment after a long day of teaching. Thomas was preparing dinner while Marcus browsed through some new sheet music he had brought. It was a comfortable domestic scene, a far cry from that rainy night in the subway station. "I've been thinking," Marcus said. "I want to produce an album with you. Your compositions, some classical pieces, maybe some more duets, something that captures what made that night at Lincoln Center so special." Thomas stirred the pasta sauce thoughtfully. "I don't know if we can recapture that. It was spontaneous, unrehearsed. That's what made it magical." "Then we'll keep it spontaneous," Marcus insisted. "No multiple takes, trying to achieve perfection. We'll record live, capture the raw emotion, the genuine connection. I think people are hungry for that kind of authenticity in classical music." They recorded the album over 3 days in a small studio in Brooklyn. Marcus was true to his word, keeping everything loose and unrehearsed. They played pieces they loved, improvised freely, and let the music flow naturally. The result was unlike any classical album released that year. Critics called it revolutionary, a breath of fresh air in a genre often criticized for being stale and overly formal. But the real impact was on listeners. People wrote letters describing how the music moved them, how it helped them through difficult times, how it reminded them of the power of beauty in a harsh world. Thomas read each letter carefully, humbled by the response. He had spent years thinking his music only mattered to himself. Now he understood it had the power to touch others, to make a difference in their lives. One letter particularly affected him. It was from a young woman who had been considering giving up music entirely. She had been told by teachers that she wasn't good enough, that she should pursue something more practical. But after hearing Thomas's story and his album, she decided to keep playing, to pursue her passion regardless of what others said. She thanked him for showing her that music was about more than technical perfection, that it was about expressing the truth of who you are. Thomas showed the letter to Marcus. "This," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is why it all happened. Not the recognition, or the success, but this, helping someone else find their way." Marcus smiled. "You're doing more than helping one person. You're changing how people think about music, about success, about second chances." That night, I walked into that subway station, changed both our lives. "Did you ever imagine it would lead to all this?" Thomas asked. "No," Marcus admitted. "I was just following an impulse, drawn by beautiful music, but I'm grateful every day that I listened to that impulse. You've made me a better musician and a better person." The documentary about Thomas's life premiered at a major film festival and won several awards. It traced his journey from Juilliard to the streets to his redemption, but it also explored deeper themes about talent, poverty, mental health, and the power of music to heal. Schools began using it in music education programs, and social service organizations screened it to inspire both their workers and the people they served. Thomas was invited to give talks at universities and conferences. He spoke honestly about his years of homelessness, the struggles with depression and addiction that had contributed to his fall, and the long road back to stability. He didn't sugarcoat anything or present his story as a simple tale of triumph. He talked about the ongoing challenges, the days when he still struggled, the work required to maintain his recovery, but he also talked about hope, about the unexpected ways life can change, about the importance of recognizing talent and humanity in everyone, regardless of their circumstances. He challenged audiences to look more carefully at the homeless people they passed on the street, to consider what stories and abilities might be hidden beneath the surface. 1 year after that fateful night at Lincoln Center, Marcus organized a benefit concert. He invited Thomas to perform again, along with several of Thomas's most promising students. The concert would raise money for homeless services and music education programs. It sold out within hours of tickets going on sale. The night of the concert, Thomas stood backstage with the same nervous energy he had felt a year earlier, but this time, it was different. He wasn't afraid of failing or being exposed as a fraud. He was excited to share music with people, to tell a story through his playing, to connect with the audience in that profound way that only music allows. Marcus found him in the green room. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready?" Thomas confirmed. When Thomas walked onto that stage, the audience rose to their feet before he played a single note. The ovation was long and heartfelt, recognition not just of his talent but of his journey. He sat at the piano, placed his hands on the keys, and began to play. He had chosen to perform one of his own compositions, a piece he had written during his years on the street. It was a meditation on loneliness and connection, on despair and hope, on being lost and found. It spoke of cold nights and warm hearts, of darkness and light, of the music that had sustained him through everything. As he played, Thomas thought about the long, strange journey that had brought him to this moment. He thought about the broken piano in the subway station, about the night Marcus had appeared like an angel in expensive clothes, about every step that had led him from that lowest point to this stage. He thought about his students and the music they were creating, about the people his story had inspired, about the second chance he had been given. The music poured out of him, honest and real and absolutely true. And when the final note faded away and the audience erupted in applause, Thomas knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be, not because he had achieved fame or success, but because he was sharing his gift with the world, making a difference one note at a time. Marcus joined him on stage, and together they took their bows, two pianists from different worlds, brought together by music, proving that talent and beauty can be found in the most unexpected places. All it takes is someone willing to stop and listen, to look beyond the surface, to recognize the humanity and potential in everyone they meet. The concert that night raised over $1 million for homeless services and music education. But more than that, it reminded everyone present that music has the power to transform lives, to bridge divides, to heal wounds, and to remind us of what makes us human. And it all started because one famous pianist followed his instincts into a subway station and asked a homeless man to play.